Manhwa title in the right corner of the screen. Enjoy watching.
A month ago, a girl discovers that she has found herself in a novel called Moon Shrouded in Darkness. The minor characters in this novel were much more popular than the main characters. The infamous villain and secret mastermind, the archduke that helped her, a complex relationship entangled in submission and obsession, a subtle emotional connection that could easily be mistaken for love. The chemistry between these two, a flawed man and woman, was incredible. Readers fervently wished they were together despite their atrocities. Thus occurred the fateful meeting of two villains. The archduke, eager to accuse someone of a crime, took to wife a woman with whom he had made a heartless political alliance, only to destroy her on their first wedding night. While covering his tracks from the crime scene, he meets the villainess who was hiding under the guise of a maid. Intrigued by her silence, even though she was a witness, he soon discovered her abilities for dark magic. This moment becomes the beginning of their journey of ruthless evil. It was very impressive, for the girl was only a reader and could not think that after the last page was read, her life would never be the same again. The problem is that the body she possessed belongs to the fiancé who died on her wedding night, Enrique Wintersour. And that's not all. After the girl got into this body, she learned something new. Once Enrica was a mage, but her family had used it all her life, and as soon as her body weakened and she lost her magic, they married her off to the Archduke, just to get rid of her as soon as possible. There was almost no magic left in that frail body now, and if she could imagine that she still had that ability, it wouldn't be so bad. Anyway, all she has to do is accept all these moments, obstacles, injustices, and live this life in a new way. Meanwhile, the girl has found herself in this world just as everyone has learned of her problem. Her father bursts into the room without warning and asks him to confirm those rumors that her magic is almost all gone. He's mad because it directly affects his plans. He's yelling at her as if he's lost all his strength. And it's her fault. He's angry, and all he wants to hear is that it's all a lie. Usually in such situations, parents support their children, but Enrica was ready for it, even cried a little and said she was very sorry for it. She feels like she should be the one supporting everyone around her, not the other way around. And there's a sense of guilt, even though there shouldn't be. If this man used to hold back a little and not be rude when he could get benefits, now there is nothing stopping him from saying everything he really thinks. In an instant, the daughter became a burden to her family and heard that even the beasts in the duchy are much more useful than her. The Duke of Wintersour was a rude man who treated his own daughter no more than a magic instrument. She has to apologize for something she had no control over, and even promised to find a way to restore her power by any means necessary, even though she knows it's impossible. She just asked for some time, but her father is already angry and doesn't want to hear a word from her. He doesn't even want to think about someone like her attending a banquet on behalf of the duchy. He considers it a great shame. In fact, the girl would be happy not to show up at the banquet and hopes he'll ban her right now. But no. As much as the two of them would like it, she will have to make her first appearance since the Archduke's proposal. The man has asked her to behave and prepare herself well, and Enrica has simply kept silent, as she does not want to upset him further. The door had just slammed shut, and she was already getting tears. So much she didn't want to be there. She was already trying to think of something to think of, but nothing was working out. It's been a month since she mastered Enrique, and with her magic running out, she has little to do anymore. The girl figured that if she pissed off her father even a little more, she risked being on the street, and that was the only reason she listened to him. Meanwhile, the assistant knocked on the door. Usually no one comes to see her at this time, which means she has something important to say. The lady immediately felt an unpleasant energy, and by a remarkable coincidence, there was even a draft in the room which ran cold through her body, as if hinting of something. The assistant walks in as boldly as if it were her room, and acts not entirely respectful, as if she's not trying to hide it. It was the same assistant villain who stood by and watched the agonizing death of her mistress without blinking an eye. Enrica pretended to be happy to see her, that she didn't know anything, and even asked how she was doing, which was just the beginning of the game. Since the girl was lucky enough to know who was who, she had been working very hard since the first day she was here on a way to defeat this villain. The same goes for everyone else. Instead of openly competing with her, making life difficult, Enrica chose a more unusual way. She tries to befriend her, gives her gifts, outsources her work, and that's just a small part of it. In fact, there is no other way to fight her. One wrong move or unpleasant look in her direction, and the lady will be in the crosshairs and may lose her life before she marries the Archduke. Meanwhile, the assistant says she's come to prepare her for the banquet, which is a very short time away. They're going to trim the ends of their hair a bit now, though bring the scissors in Sarah's hands, she's already feeling a little uneasy. The girl tries not to give the appearance, but still peeks at her and cannot get used to this unusually beautiful and mesmerizing appearance. Bright hair color and sharply set eyes. Her face as if screaming, "Yes, I'm a villain, look at me and be afraid." It's just a pity that even though Enrica is her mistress, she doesn't feel like one. Lately, she's even started acting and feeling like a puppet. A little strange of her, but still, the girl started talking about her personal life and asked if the assistant had heard that Archduke Cronkart had proposed to her and asked what she thought about it. Sarah never hides the truth and always says what she thinks, so replied that she doesn't see anything good in it. The assistant has long stood out from the rest of the maids, and this is what she liked the owner of the house. Sarah always tells him about the rumors and knows what of the latest events will interest him, of course. For this, he pays her extra and everyone is satisfied. Meanwhile, the girl doesn't forget that she has to befriend her. Sarah only touches her hair as Mistress is already excited about it and says he's looking forward to the result, even though he already knows it's going to be flawless as usual. The lady's efforts to win Sarah's favor after becoming mistress of this body were not in vain. At first, the girl shared with her various sweets. Then I stopped forcing her to do hard work, sometimes even doing something instead and even giving her extra days off. As a result, it may have nothing to do with it, but some problems have disappeared, especially those that could theoretically be caused by Sarah and her bad moods. Sometimes she allowed herself to do her makeup or hair for her, but lately, even in a bad mood, the assistant does her job to perfection. Moreover, they even began to discuss their past together, telling different interesting stories. For example, today Sarah says that the mistress reminds her of Lily. That was the name of a puppy she had as a child. He had light-colored fluffy fur, but unfortunately he got sick, and now he's gone. She did her job well during the conversation. Enrica looks great. Now it is not scary at all to appear in social society. The girl is completely confident and madly grateful to her for that. Everything seemed fine. But at one point, Sarah said a very strange phrase. "Now that things have come this far, just enjoy life, milady. Who knows, this may be your last banquet before your wedding." It sounded ambiguous. Enrica tried her best to ignore it so as not to spoil her wonderful mood before the event. Still, the girl can't relax, even though she knows Sarah's been on her side for forever. Her last banquet before the wedding. Whatever it sounds like and whatever it means, it's right. Like she said, it could be her last. She is often very frustrated that there is not one person around that she doesn't doubt and tell all her worries to. Relations with her parents are terrible. No friends. The assistant is a villain. No matter how good relations are between them now, she still tries to keep her at a distance and tells only what will not be used against her in the future. Naturally, as soon as she stepped into the banquet, she heard a lot of gossip, all about her. She went up to the two ladies to say hello, and they were very much embarrassed, for they were afraid that the girl might have heard something from them. Enrica thanked the Countess for the invitation, and the Countess told her that they were just discussing the upcoming wedding, supposedly already looking forward to seeing the lady in her wedding dress. The problem is that up to this point, the girl was sure few people knew about it, but it seems she was very much mistaken. She was even offered to listen to a few rumors, and was surprised that the lady would hear it from them for the first time. According to rumors, the Archduke said that he could not wait, so he canceled the engagement and immediately proposed, allegedly, he does not want other men to see her, so all their dates were held in secret. And that's all that these ladies were able to find out for this day, Enrica, and not surprised, because the Duke wants to get rid of her as soon as possible. And the fact that for people it looks romantic, he only to his advantage. But there is a moment, what dates people talk about, because the girl did not even see his face. She resents the fact that in the eyes of the aristocrats, the guy looks the best, and no one has any idea who he really is and what he's up to. No wonder he's the one spreading these rumors to make everyone think the best of him. And then the lady wondered if the suspicious carriages that had been traveling back and forth for the last few days could be gifts from the Archduke, to find himself madly in love, who would spare nothing and nothing for his beloved. If Duke Wintersoar is the type of man who would give his daughter for a fortune without a second thought, then why did they target Enrica? Although now, if you look at the situation from the outside, it turns out that it is the most favorable option, because in case of something, it will be very easy to get rid of it and no one will even notice. Then he must have assumed that her father would not trouble himself too much to investigate, in case of anything. And now that everyone is sure that the Archduke is in love with her, he has a perfect alibi. As expected of a villain, he has prepared thoroughly. Now we can only guess when he will act and what her chances of survival are. The girl was very sad. Those ladies saw it and thought something was wrong. They got worried and offered to bring a glass of water. The lady replied that she was fine. She was just a little dizzy from being in the carriage for so long. Suddenly, a second aristocrat comes up and says something interesting. They wanted to tell Enrique about it too, but she wasn't around anymore. The girl hadn't said goodbye and had already run off somewhere, though they had good news on her. At least they thought so. They were going to say that Mr. Archduke was already here, but Enrique was in a hurry somewhere, as if she were trying with all her might to avoid this meeting, and had sensed his arrival beforehand. She was running so hard she almost tripped and fell a couple times. Her shoes held up, but her breathing can barely keep up. It had been a long time since the girl had been so tense. She had decided enough was enough. Now that rumors had spread like wildfire in high society, unfortunately, breaking off the engagement already seemed something impossible to do. She has no idea what to do now. Her headache has only gotten worse. The only thing left to do is to go outside and get some fresh air. Enrica opens the balcony. She didn't notice anything at first, but as soon as she got closer, she saw a man standing with his back to her. She didn't even realize it before he noticed her and turned around. They met eyes, and something told her it was the same fiancé she was trying to run away from. She was embarrassed that she had prevented him from being alone, and she apologized at once, though she still couldn't see his face. He replied that it was fine, set down his glass, which meant he wanted to meet her and talk to her. The lady is trying to catch her breath, and in the meantime, she hears a very pleasant voice and is even interested in the man. His voice sounded so amazing that she wanted to listen to it for a long time. She obviously didn't regret going out on the balcony. She could only hope that this wasn't the villain who was going to be her husband. He began to move closer to her, and then she smelled his scent, which made her feel pleasantly dizzy again. He's already driving her crazy. The girl can't do anything about it, and doesn't even think about who he might be when he presents himself. I guess if Winter were a man, she'd have his face and no other, his eyes you want to drown in, and his voice charms and draws you in. The lady regretted for the first time that she never went to such events, refused, stayed at home, and as it turned out, very in vain. She's enchanted, can't look away, and has no idea how in love she looks from the outside. But that wasn't all. As soon as he smiled, she lost control of herself and wanted to disappear into those eyes. We can assume that he's definitely not a minor character because he looks so great. If the assistant Sarah and her father the girl recognized at once, without any problems, the face of this man as if there was no and never was in Enrica's memories. Moreover, the girl had never once seen him in the illustrations of the novel, so I had to ask what his name was. He was at once surprised. He didn't think anyone didn't know his name, and even gave a last chance to remember though. To her, this reaction seemed strange. She didn't have to know him, especially since it seemed a bit too cocky. The lad told her he was the Earl of Balbrington, to which she introduced herself in return, though not so eager anymore. She's really never heard that name before, which means he's definitely not the main character, or even a minor character. After that, the girl allowed herself to assume that he was waiting for someone. Here are 2 glasses, and he's already smiling and looking at her, as if he found something in her. He told me that unfortunately no one was to join him this time, and the 2 glasses here were simply out of habit, nothing more. And afterwards, he said one very interesting phrase, "I think I've been waiting for you without realizing it." It sounded romantic, and it corrected his impression of himself a bit. After that, he proposed to have a drink together. The lady thought for a long time whether it would not be a mistake that could be regretted later. If it was a trap, especially, it would be strange to agree to such a thing with a man about whom she knew nothing about. Enrica changed her mind very quickly that if she went back, there was nothing good waiting for her there. And here was such a handsome man, and why not spend this evening with him? She forgot about her problems for a while and began to enjoy a pleasant evening with him, especially since she doesn't have a husband yet and is entitled to it. As it usually happens, after a drink, people are not in control of themselves and tell everything that bothers them. So she admitted that she's forced to get married, even though she hasn't even seen the man in person and feels it won't end well. She's so imbued with the atmosphere that it's fallen out a bit more than it should. But so far, so good. She starts telling him everything nonstop. He doesn't even have time to say anything and just listens in silence. Enrica doesn't even look him in the eyes. She looks away, into the void, anywhere but in his direction. It's still unclear if he's keeping the conversation civil or if he's genuinely interested. But the guy asked, and what's wrong with her fiancé that she thinks so badly of him? She can't say he's going to destroy her. He'll just think she's crazy and not want to hang out anymore. She didn't give any details, just made it clear that one way or another, it was necessary to avoid the wedding, but only she and he knew of this desire. She's so honest with him that she even admitted how she thought about running away from the empire and starting her life with a clean slate. And then his glass falls to the floor, shattering with a loud crack, which means he didn't like what he heard very much. The girl didn't even realize it wasn't an accident. It was his reaction to her plan, and it looked like he was going to start talking her out of it now. Though she was a total stranger to him, and they had known each other for no more than half an hour, he was suddenly curious to know if she loved someone who made her not want to be with that fiancé. I really wonder why it's so important to him. His eyes even got wet and a kind of stupor, as if the guy is in danger of losing her and is afraid to even think about it. She immediately starts to calm him down, explaining that he doesn't have any other boyfriends and that she's never dated anyone. They talked about it for a while longer, when suddenly he comes closer to her and says he has an idea to help her with the idea, if of course she's interested in it. In his opinion, it is very simple. To eliminate the possibility of becoming the wife of one man, you have to marry another man. At first, it all sounded very logical, but once the girl starts to realize what he means, she can't even believe what he's implying. I had to pretend that she appreciated the idea, but still, she had no idea where to find this other man, and in such a short time too. Since Enrica has not yet responded to the Archduke's proposal, she has every right to marry another, only to find him. The Count was smiling the whole time, saying there was no problem with it, but never said any specifics. It was as if he'd left the best part for later, to sustain the intrigue and chat with her a little longer. At some point, the girl thought and remembered that who, if not her, would decide how her future would turn out. She did not wait for any hints. She just came closer to him, looked into his eyes, and said that if he did not mind, she would very much like to be his wife, and that he would not owe her anything. They could live separately, the main thing being that he would help her to avoid marrying the Archduke. She took his hand very gently, told him how important it was to her, and promised that if he didn't like it, they could break up at any time. Especially since he proposed the idea himself and knows that time is short. Few people would agree to something like this, so all hope is on him. Right after that, the lady was even surprised that she dared to say such a thing to him, thought that she had definitely lost her mind, and even wanted to apologize. But since it's her last chance, there's nowhere to go. And if he's interested in profit or compensation, by the time the problem is solved, she's sure to come up with something. Suddenly, he starts to let go of her hand, taking his own, Enrica already regretting asking him to do that. But he took her just to hold her tight and let her know that she could count on him. So be it. He agreed to be her husband, and even smiled like he was enjoying the deal, which is fine. Who would have thought that just wanting some fresh air on the balcony would lead to something like this? She had almost solved her problem. All she had to do was finish it, and Enrica would be safe forever. She could even leave the empire if she wanted to, and no one would know about it. The lady doesn't even know what to say. She's so grateful it can't even be described in words. He literally just agreed to save her life without realizing it himself. Very interesting what will come out of this, and more importantly, why he agreed so easily. And was it really something like love at first sight? It looks like fate brought them together. But it's too early to get excited. We have a wedding to plan, and then we can really relax. The moment they finally discussed everything, she thought it was a dream. Enrica even started punching herself in the face. But he stopped her and told her not to worry, because she was definitely safe with him and could fear nothing. In fact, everything would be fine. But there's one thing that's very confusing to her, and that's her father, who, once he finds out she's decided to marry someone else, is obviously against it and will try to ruin it. To which the guy replies that she cannot think about it. He will decide everything, and she only has to focus on the preparation for the wedding and trust him. Sounds good, but the problem is not so simple, because the fact that she has been proposed to has spread in high society, and no one even suspects that she already has a new fiancé. He has another idea for this one. There's nothing stopping them from going to the temple right now and giving a marriage luncheon. Enrica seemed to blossom at this point. She asked if they could really do it, to which he replies that of course, the main thing is desire. In any case, there is time. And now he proposes to return to the banquet and show everyone that she is already with another man, and that the Archduke is no longer interested in her. She gave him her hand without a second thought, and began to hope that everything would be as perfect as he promised. For knowing her relatives, they would always find a way to mess things up. Here they are in the audience, holding hands, but so far, no one's even looked in their direction. But that's just for now. I wonder what people's surprise will be when she, the one the Archduke proposed to, follows another man holding his hand. The guy noticed her anxiety. He tried to fix it and reminded her that as long as he was around, she was perfectly safe, and no one would even say a bad word to her. The girl thanked him for it. It was the first time she felt like someone could and even wanted to stand up for her. And in the meantime, the very moment she'd been longing for, and at the same time, incredibly afraid of, people are starting to notice them. But the Count was not confused. He began to embrace the lady and showed everyone that they are together, so that the rumors tomorrow will reach as many people as possible. He gently touches her hair, kisses her, and doesn't let go of her a single step. Enrica was even able to trust him. And at one point, I even forgot that I wasn't looking at people anymore, just enjoying the moment like he asked me to. And in the meantime, the banquet has come to an end. Everyone's starting to leave and they're already outside. Her carriage was served, and no matter how much the fellow tried to insist on walking her straight home, she refused. for if she stayed with him any longer, she was sure to faint and get worse. Finally, they agreed when they would see each other next time, gave each other their addresses, and, just in case, decided not to appear in crowded places in the next few days. Today's performance was quite enough. Afterwards, they said goodbye very nicely. Each left a good impression and a desire to see each other again as soon as possible. The guy even admitted that he was glad to meet her and was sure that only good things were ahead for the two of them. Naturally, she reciprocated him, said goodnight, though she did not want to part. But she could not do it any other way. The carriage left. The guy made sure that everything was in order, and suddenly, an assistant comes to him who was looking for him for a very long time. And then something interesting happened. He called him Archduke, to which the gentleman ordered that from now on he was not an Archduke to him, but what he had introduced himself to Enrica, Count Cale Balbrington. Could this mean that the fellow had not introduced himself as what he really was, and it was probable that he was the one the girl was avoiding? He did not explain anything to the aide. He simply asked him to pass it on to the others. Otherwise, he would take away anyone who addressed him by his real name. It's all very interesting, and the main thing is that it shouldn't be dangerous for Enrica, who trusted him and is sure he's the Earl of Kyle Belbrington. Right after that, the guy asked the assistant how come the girl didn't know him and asked his name, as if she hadn't heard anything about him and didn't recognize him from first sight. It's very simple. It's natural for her not to know anyone but the highest nobility. Moreover, the girl's father is too controlling of his daughter. That's why she doesn't know about the news around her. Suddenly, the assistant forgot. He asked him again to make sure that all the guests today do not say anything unnecessary, because from now on, he is for everyone. The Count, no matter how much the assistant tries to find out what is going on, he keeps silent and says that it is better for him not to know about it. It's very simple. He just needs her, and he wants her any way he can get her. All he has to do is find out who he really is and hope she doesn't get hurt because of it. He starts some kind of double game, and it's impossible to foresee what's going to happen next, and more importantly, whether it's dangerous or not. In the meantime, the girl had already returned home, the road flew by, she was in her thoughts all the time, and an hour later she was there. Tried to open the door very quietly. Going into the hallway was a little noisy, but she made the best of it. You can see how she has no strength. It's like she's in a fog. She can't believe all that's happened in a short time and how to realize it all. Even though she is the eldest daughter, she is not greeted by anyone except the butler. But even he didn't react much to her appearance, basically as usual. He only said that the gentleman is waiting for her in the study. He wants to have a serious talk with her. And then she panics in case he found out something and wants to kick her out of the house. Enrica came to him. She didn't say a single word, just waiting for something from him. Some reaction. It doesn't even matter if it's bad or good, just as long as he doesn't keep quiet. Instead of words of greeting, he says that she looks much better dressed up than she later sees her in which he is accustomed to see her at home. Strange, but the man acts calm, and the first question he asked her was whether she had been in touch with the Archduke, though it was news to her that he was there at all. She hasn't even seen him and has no idea if he's seen her. All she has to do is figure out the best way to answer her father, because if the groom was at the banquet, then he saw everything and probably even talked to his father about it. But that's just her guess. The girl was completely confused. The most important thing for her was to make sure he didn't find out for the Count before she told him herself. She doesn't even look him in the eye. She's trying to think of something, but nothing works. The man notices it, and he already suspects something. He doesn't even want to hear anything about her never meeting her fiancé and not having good news. The girl could think of nothing better to do than to play along and say what her father wanted to hear. Namely, that she had greeted the Archduke, that everything had gone well, and nothing bad had happened. In the end, everything went fine. He asked her to try not to gain too much weight before the wedding. He would soon assign her an assistant, and asked her to prepare little by little. She had at last become useful to him, so he told her. It was terrible, but the daughter had long since become accustomed to what a... If you carefully observe the behavior of this man, you can notice that his gaze for the first time was not cold. It was, on the contrary, too unaccustomed. You'd think that would be the end of it. She'd retire to her room and go to sleep. But no, Enrica decided to have a very risky conversation. Asked how he would react if she said she didn't want to marry the Archduke and that she already had another candidate as a husband. At this point, he had a little stupor, and of course, he couldn't react normally. He walks up to her and hits her so hard that she doesn't even dare say anything else to him about it. He says just because he praises her doesn't mean you have to lose your mind and allow yourself to think like that. He ordered her out of his office immediately and warned her that if she ever said anything like that again, she would regret it for the rest of her life. This conversation sounded very unfair. She is an adult and has the right to decide for herself who to be with, when and who to marry without asking anyone, not even her parents. It was strange that the girl could expect anything different this man didn't change. And in fact, she was very lucky that today, he let her stay here and didn't kick her out on the street. Now he will only watch her more and will definitely try his best to make sure that no one else but the Archduke comes into her life. In the meantime, she's already in her room. Sarah has prepared her bed for her as usual and cleaned up the place. This is the first time Enrica is back this late. She even had to go into the room a few times, but the lady was gone the whole time. The girl, for some reason, stopped at the threshold and does not pass on. She looks at the assistant with tearful eyes. She runs up to her and says she's ready to listen. Sarah's never seen her like this before and thought it was because of the banquet. A little strange, but the helper reminded her of how she talked about her dog, Lily. Enrica didn't immediately realize what that had to do with it, but the helper just asked her to listen. When she was little, Lily went for a walk alone. She came in crying a lot, and it's because the local bullies didn't like that she wasn't socializing with them, so they decided to take out their anger on her dog. Long story short, they never got to do something like that again. She took care of it once and for all and doesn't regret it one bit. So it's another situation where Sarah looks at Mistress and sees an image of a dog that she loved very much. The girl still didn't understand what her dog had to do with it. She wasn't really listening to her. She was in her own thoughts. And that's fine. Even if she is a villain like her father, there is still a big difference between them. The girl always feels who really doesn't care, and unlike her father, Sarah at least sometimes supports her. After a little bit of sadness and support, the girl decided to tell the good news, namely that she was going to get married. Sarah was not surprised by this, and in fact, the assistant didn't even understand if the mistress could think she didn't know such things. As suddenly, the lady explains that she's not marrying who everyone thinks she is. She met a cute guy at a banquet today and will soon be his wife. At this point, the assistant didn't even realize whether to be angry now or, on the contrary, happy. She had too ambiguous an opinion. She clearly wasn't ready for it. Even thought it was some kind of a joke, yelled a little, but then immediately apologized. Enrica asked, and calm down, calmly listen, and not get angry. And after that, again repeated the same thing and said that it was true, and everything was already solved. As any other person would have done in her place, Sarah said the following: "Do you really mind marrying a man you've known for a day, without knowing what he is, where he lives, what he does, how old he is, what his parents did for a living, and how many brothers and sisters he has?" To which the girl replies that his name is Kyle. He's an earl and he's very tall, as if that's enough. And she answered her question, and then confessed that he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. She had liked him at first sight, and it seemed to be mutual. Sarah immediately begins to dissuade her from the idea, explaining that the lady doesn't understand anything. Tall men are known for their fickleness, and handsome men are often deceivers. Enrica only laughed in response. She made it clear that she was in love and didn't want to marry anyone else. She is well aware of how it looks from the outside, that any other person would say that if it were her. But maybe it's time to stop being afraid of other people's opinions and listen to her own heart. And if it wasn't for the last conversation between the guy and the assistant, everything would be fine. But now, the girl risks disappointment. And sooner or later, we'll find out who he really is. Despite the complete misunderstanding, no one began to shout, to prove anything, to be indignant. It was but a very little. In the end, they just calmed down and accepted everything as it was, even Sarah. The assistant is only afraid of one thing, lest a stranger harm her. Though if you think about it that way, no matter who she marries, there is always a risk. The girl's afraid of it herself, but at least she'd rather love the man than hate him from day one. There are some people around who are better to stay away from, even Sarah. At first, she was afraid of her because she knew she was a villain. But now, everything has changed, and she has become like an older sister to her, who wants to trust and tell her everything that is going on new. The next day, Wintersore Mansion. Mistress is awake and even feeling pretty good after yesterday's hard day. Probably the meeting with that guy had such a good effect on her. And on the bad side, after the meeting with my dad, there's a bunch of bruises that I don't think makeup can cover up. But the assistant will still try to come up with something. In the end, they decided it was better to leave it as it was. It would heal faster, especially since they didn't have any important events scheduled for today. Meanwhile, another maid comes in and says that Mrs. March is asking Enrico to join her for tea in the garden. This maid, she's Martha's closest maid, Martha Wintersore. She's loved throughout the house. She's the little sister who's different in literally everything. Compared to Enrica, she is not shy about showing kindness to her father, is easy to talk to the staff, and almost everyone thinks very highly of her. But for some reason, she was hostile to her sister from the start and often made trouble in secret, especially constantly spread strange rumors among the servants. Eventually, the image of Enrica came to correspond to the evil sister who is jealous of the younger one. Because of this, she is not treated well in the whole house, and it's all because of her sister, who has too much time on her hands and is bored a lot of the time. It even happened that when Enrica went out for a walk, she was stopped and asked to go the other way, because her sister was already walking in one direction or the other. The maids even gave her the best clothes, the food, the invitations, and Enrique got what was left of the. The girl could not even eat the food prepared by the cook. Normally, March often asked him to spoil her sister's portion, and for this she gave a reward. So, the request to join the tea party was very strange. There was clearly nothing good waiting for the girl there, and it would be better if she made up a legend to refuse. As suddenly, she didn't even have to say anything. Sarah did it all instead. She said that Madam wasn't feeling well today and asked her to tell her sister that it wouldn't be possible to see her today. So the maid replied that it was too disrespectful to refuse Mrs. Martha's invitation on such a pretext, and that she could in no way convey these words to her. Thinks those two should think twice before refusing to see that girl. Except Sarah doesn't. Even though she's just an assistant, she's on Enrica's side, and will do anything to make sure no one can ruin her mood tonight. Meanwhile, they managed to get rid of that annoying assistant. The lady thanked Sarah and said she didn't know what she would have done without her. Who would have thought? But not even a few minutes passed. But the girl has already changed her mind and asks if she should go. Anyway, there is plenty of free time, which sounded very strange. She even asked for help getting ready, like she's up to something and she's not just going in there for no benefit. All the more so, the weather is very pleasant today. No bright sunshine, but at the same time not cloudy. A good excuse to go out for a tea party. And if it was with some other person, it would be great. Myrta didn't even get the message that her sister refused. Enrica is already here, which means she's definitely up to something. As usual, March didn't even greet her. She just looked at her and let her know to take a seat. But suddenly, she notices that her sister has a lot of wounds on her face, and probably Enrica is not hiding anything on purpose, and something interesting is about to begin. March is usually happy about this kind of thing, but this time, I agree. The father clearly overreacted, and it's too much. She was even afraid to imagine what her sister had said to make him do that to her. It was the first time she had ever reacted like that. Even Sarah was surprised, but she still tried not to show it. After all, it wasn't what they had come here for anyway. Usually March didn't notice her helpers, but this time even started asking if they had time to treat the wound and what they did to make them heal faster. Today the girl didn't look like herself. Sarah knows her very well, but this time, Mistress's sister is overprotective, considering how she usually behaves. Moreover, the girl began to worry about what would happen if the scars remained, which means that they would have to be covered with makeup every time. She knows how uncomfortable it is and how much time it takes. The assistant didn't hold back, and since the lady allows herself to do what she cares about, Sarah offers to get revenge and make sure the Duke has the same thing on his face, as would be fair and just. Enrica stopped her in time. She thought it was not worth the rest to find out what they thought of her father. Especially, it was very dangerous to say such a thing in the presence of his favorite daughter, who always tells him everything. The girl asked me to bring her something for tea, so she and her sister are alone and can have a proper conversation. March wanted to know how the reception went, and asked not to be told that the sister was again standing in the corner and never once went to the center of the room, for that was usually the case. It sounded a little hurtful, but it was the opposite, and she didn't need to know it. Afterward, the villainess says she heard of her meeting with the Archduke yesterday, and asked her to tell him how it went. She's crazy about him and doesn't mind hearing some of the details, even though it didn't really happen, and now someone's going to have to make up a story that doesn't exist. She had never even seen the man, and in fact, was with another guy. If the sister only knew the truth, she would have been speechless, or at the very least, passed out immediately. And suddenly, the sister changed her mind. She was not interested in hearing anything about it, because supposedly what difference does it make if behind his beauty there is a monster anyway? As far as she knows, the Archduke is so cruel that he destroyed his whole family, and all in order to take the place of the Grand Duke. She's clearly trying to intimidate her, but the girl is no longer surprised and can only laugh it off, nothing more. March is already trying her best to say everything she knows to cause panic and fear in her sister. But she can't do anything. The girl is calmly drinking her tea and doesn't react in any way to it. She doesn't care about this man. She doesn't want to marry him anyway. And most importantly, she won't. But that's a mystery for now. The sister notices that nothing is working. She even got up from the table and begins to resent what is the matter, because she does not listen to her, although usually it was the opposite. Enrica was naive and easily succumbed to such things. The lady is not going to explain anything anyway. She was invited to a tea party. She came and enjoyed her tea, and she is certainly not going to discuss her personal life with her. Instead, she looked at the beautiful view, the sunset, thought about the future, while her sister was already freaking out that no matter how hard she tried, it was only her own mood that was ruining it. She's already screaming all over the yard, acting inappropriately, when suddenly Enrica sees a man behind her who couldn't possibly be here. At least they didn't agree to it. As soon as the girl starts to stare at him, he starts to smile, and the sister still doesn't understand anything. She didn't even feel that someone was behind her. At this moment, Enrica can't believe her eyes. She's insanely happy to see him. But if he had shown up a little later, it would have been much better. But now, we'll have to explain everything and introduce them. Unless, of course, they come up with something more interesting. And not pretend that they were just friends, and that he had come on business and nothing more. How things would really turn out was unclear, but for the present, He merely greeted her and looked at her with the same look that he had loved her in himself that evening. He even decided to laugh and asked the girl not to pretend he was here. It was just interesting to see her sister's reaction, or rather, how much she would be scared. A few minutes passed. She calmed down and finally suspected something, starts to turn around and sees a guy who even made her a little confused, and she obviously didn't expect to see him here. She was definitely ashamed of her behavior, although it was her own fault. Not only that, she even fell to the floor, unable to stand on her feet. And it's no wonder, I guess that's how most girls react to the sight of him. And then March realizes that since he's not here to see her, he might know her sister, which she refuses to believe. She starts looking at each of them in turn, not understanding anything, and waits for them to explain everything. She's not as brave as she was a few minutes ago, sitting on the sidelines waiting for who knows what. At that moment, all those assumptions that they would hide their relationship fell away in a second. The guy pressed the girl against him and told her how much he missed her. And this time, he wouldn't let her go as easily and quickly as last time. Not to ask it aloud, she asked in a whisper why he had come here, to which he replies that it was a very strange question. Did she not remember how he had promised to come and see her soon as he had time to do so? She remembers those words, but she had no idea it would be so short a time and she wasn't ready for it. But he asked her not to think about it, to relax and just enjoy this day together, if of course no one would interrupt them. So it was fine weather for a walk today. He suggested going to a very beautiful place, seeing if she had the will to walk for a long time. She replied in a trembling voice that of course she didn't mind, but at the same time, she was afraid that her sister would tell her father at once and things might go bad very quickly. In any case, there's nothing left to do but leave it alone, walk away quietly and think about nothing. Meanwhile, the sister can't calm down. It's weird how she reacted, and it's unclear if she knows him or not. Turns out she is just jealous and can't see these two people together. The only thing left to find out is if she recognized him as that abusive fiancé, or if he is faking it. Too many questions, and so far, unfortunately, no answers. They're already calmly strolling around the territory in no hurry, and Enrica makes it look like he's not afraid of anything at all, and finally decided to ask how her sister knows him and how they met, unless, of course, it's a secret. The guy says he saw her sister a few years ago at an event. It all sounds non-offensive, but the sister's reaction suggests he's not telling us something. Her reaction was too violent. She was barely holding herself together, and there was this energy, like she was about to, and she would say something that would have been better to remain silent. And meanwhile, he started asking a suspiciously large number of questions about the groom her relatives had prepared for her. He wondered what she thought of him. He wanted to hear a detailed answer, but she wouldn't talk about it. Just briefly replied that she listened to her heart and wouldn't be with him under any circumstances. He took her hand very gently afterward, still remaining mysterious and not explaining why he was so interested in it. The girl tried to look at him, to see something, but it's impossible. He's very good at controlling his emotions. Because of that, it's hard to know what he needs it for. The first time they met, when he looked at her too much, it was no surprise to her. But now he looks at her even more often than he did then, and it's making her a little uneasy. It doesn't mean she's against it. She's just very embarrassed, especially given the whole situation and more. Meanwhile, she did not miss the opportunity and decided to talk about what to do next. Because if her father found out that she was going to abandon the marriage, the consequences could be very different. Although he asked not to think about it, it is impossible. The minute she turned to face him where she'd hit him, the guy knew right away. He knew he shouldn't have let her go last night. And now it would be a lesson to him that he would never leave her again until he was sure she was resting comfortably. Enrica smiled, for she realized that she had just revealed some family circumstances and felt very awkward, and then asked if he could believe that she had just fallen on the stairs and no one else was to blame but her. He laughed back and says that if she feels safer that way, he'll think so. Then asked her to be careful not to walk up and down the stairs in the dark. And then he decided that this wasn't the way to go. Thought about it for a few seconds, explained nothing, and just a moment later, the girl could already hear something approaching them, and at an incredible speed, as if it were some wild animal. And it was a carriage, which he seemed to have driven with a mere thought anyway. There was no point in thinking about it. He wouldn't say anything anyway, and he was already offering to go somewhere with him. He can't leave her in such a safe place. Even though it's her parents' house, she'll be much safer at his place, which means he wants to go to his house with her. And he'll probably suggest she stay there until the wedding, and then there's no point in going back to her father. It's all too sudden, and just in case she misunderstands him, she's overinsured and asks if he's suggesting that she go to the county right now and not say anything about it to anyone, to which he says she can't have any reason to refuse, especially since they'll be married soon and living together anyway. And also, at the very least, she needs to pack her things, tell at least someone about it, say goodbye to Sarah and somehow mentally prepare herself. He smiled and said it was already done. The assistant comes over. She has all of the mistress's things in her hands, which means that before he came to Enrique, he talked to the assistant and asked her to get everything ready for a certain amount of time. She came and says it is the right choice, though yesterday she tried to dissuade her, but today she thinks otherwise. Everything here is carefully packed. The mistress will not forget anything and can safely go on the road. Words can't express what Enrica feels now. On the one hand, she is madly happy, but on the other hand, she is afraid of her father's opinion. Although everyone has already told her that this is the last thing she should think about, it's her life and her chance to be happy, which means all problems are solved and there's not a single reason to stay here even 1 minute. So time to say goodbye and hit the road. The guy begins to put things together, asks not to delay. It would seem that everything is already decided for her. All things are packed, but the girl is afraid to make a mistake that even thought to talk to her father before it. So much he's intimidated her since she was a kid that she can't make up her own mind without him, and that's too bad. And she says yesterday was their first meeting, and it's awkward to move in the next day without knowing anything about each other. And then he says something that makes her even more confused. The Count hints that this is far from their first or even second meeting, and that they have definitely seen her before. But she'll find out about that later. Definitely not now, but only if she agrees to be near him. He asks her to leave here again and says she'll be better off with him than with her father, and she knows it herself. He gives his hand, asking her to make this choice, and before it's too late, to leave together, because her father could stop her at any moment, and then things will only get more complicated. The assistant fully agrees with him. She supports this idea and says that if the girl does not leave, then she will regret it very much, and there may not be a second chance. Here they are in the carriage. She still couldn't resist for long, though she didn't really want to. Enrica just wasn't used to this change, and he realizes it. She fell asleep on the way. It was a beautiful sunset, but unfortunately, he was the only one who could admire it, holding her with one hand. But as it turned out, in the end, they agreed not only that Enrica would go with him, the girl she stood her ground and said the conditions for Sarah to go with her, it would be calmer, more familiar, and less exciting with her. They look at each other. They don't even know what to talk about. They are silent, but they still keep their eyes on each other, as if, as soon as the opportunity arises, they will discuss something. Sarah was against him from the beginning. Even though she supported the mistress, that doesn't mean she stopped doubting him. She warned that she would watch him closely and not allow him to hurt Enrica, who had already suffered little as it was. But that's not all. It turns out that although the assistant didn't tell the mistress, she knows very well that this man didn't introduce himself by his own name and knows who he really is. He's the same fiancé she's been avoiding all this time. And also, he knew about it and lied on purpose just so he wouldn't lose the opportunity to have a wedding. That's another reason why Sarah didn't abandon the mistress and go to make sure he didn't hurt her. Now it is clear why her sister reacted so strangely. She immediately recognized the Archduke, and also said a lot of bad things about him, and discouraged the wedding only because she was in love with him and did not share his father's plan. On the contrary, very much did not want to do so. When the girl was definitely well asleep by now, and they made sure she couldn't hear them, they started whispering about how he's not as bad as he seems. At least he's trying to convince the helper of that. According to him, he won't do anything wrong, which I really want to believe. And he also said this weird thing about her being the only one who can save him, which means he needs her safe and sound. In the meantime, time had flown by, and they had already entered his house, given their personal belongings to the servants, and begun to admire all this beauty. You can see that he looks after this house. There are many unusual things here. There are birds and sculptures that are rarely seen in other houses. In the meantime, his assistant came up to him and said that they had something urgent to discuss, which meant that they would have to leave the girl for a while and do some work. She's alone with Sarah. She looks rested, but the assistant not so much. She seems confused. Since there was an opportunity, the girl asked how the assistant had managed to talk to the boy before she saw him, and also how she had managed to come with her things as soon as the carriage appeared near them. At this moment, the girl realizes that the assistant is too tense. It's as if she doesn't know how to properly present her with some information and is very nervous. And suddenly says she has one wish and she has to listen to it, and also asked in advance not to be angry with her. In the end, they never got around to plugging anything in. They were called to a dinner that was supposed to start a little early, but due to some circumstances, it got delayed. Enrica was not about to let the opportunity go again. She asked him to answer as honestly as possible to her one question, namely, what was the real reason why he had accepted her offer, or rather request, so readily? Because it's really weird to agree to a sham marriage so easily. It's disturbing, and there's no way she couldn't talk about it. And that's when it gets interesting. He gets up from his seat, walks over to her, takes her hand, and apologizes in advance for what she's about to hear from him, because he's never said anything about it before. She was embarrassed. She had already made up her mind about everything and had no idea what he was going to tell her now. And then he says he doesn't know if she felt it or not, but he doesn't have a heart because he's been cursed for a long time. The girl didn't immediately realize it was true. She thought there was some other meaning here, and not everything was as she had understood it. And here he tells the truth about himself, namely that his body without a heart is no different from a dead person. Now he makes himself move, filling himself with magical power, and afterward immediately recalled his words when he said that they had seen each other somewhere before. It had been at a ball at the Marlette family's. That day he had watched her from afar, and for the first time experienced a feeling unknown to him. He distinctly felt his heart, which he did not have, begin to beat at a furious rhythm. In that moment he realized that she was the only one capable of uncovering the truth about his curse. At least he truly believed it. And most importantly, if it doesn't work out and for one girl can't dispel the curse, he'll finally die once and for all. He only has a year. Now his body has reached its limit. He can't make it move any further with magic, so all hope is on her. Of course she'll try to do her best, though she has no idea if she can or if she's really what he needs. Maybe he's wrong and will only waste his time, but judging by his words, the guy has no doubts and has been convinced of everything for a long time. The problem is that the curse is probably directly related to magic, which she hasn't had in a long time. The girl just thought about it and started to feel sad about it, as suddenly remembers that in the original, Enrica was always with a magical creature that took the form of a cat under the name Vermont. Together, where no one understood Enrica, Vermont was the only one she could call her friend. According to the original, a magical creature can only return to the demonic world if the treaty with its master is broken, or if the master dies. Now her magic is weakened, but she is not dead yet and does not remember the contract being terminated. Accordingly, not all is lost yet. Vermont is probably still somewhere in the Duke's mansion. Since the magical creature is a real demon after all, it would be very easy for him to break the curse. It would take a carriage to get back to the duchy for starters, but not for long. There were just a few things to think about, and in the meantime, she had already approached the assistant to say something. She explained that she had left something very important at home and wanted to go back there for a little while, if, of course, it was possible, and he would help her do it. The aide immediately refused. He explained that he had no right to do so, especially since it was better not to even talk about it. According to him, the Earl is now on a campaign, and if he finds out that the lady is missing, there may be trouble for all of them. To which she asks if there's no other way, just really important stuff left at home, and she really wants to get it back. She eventually did, and since it was so important, the aide agreed to go with her, but warned her that they'd only be there for half an hour at most. Enrica never thought she'd be back here the day after her escape, but such are the circumstances, and there's nothing she can do about it. The girl is hiding on purpose so that no one can see her. She tries to be as visible as possible and is very worried in case something goes wrong. Even though she just disappeared with Kale, the atmosphere in the mansion hasn't changed a bit, and it's likely that March has already told everyone about everything. Meanwhile, she looked out her father's window and surprisingly, he was very much at peace, though she expected to see him at the very least furious. I wonder if no one really cares what happens to her, although it's probably for the best right now. And then she sees a kitten that looks just like the one she's looking for, except it's near the maids, and it's not going to be easy to pick up. They play with him a lot, even follow him in chat. Then they did the mistress the whole time she was here. The girl followed him. The cat had already gone somewhere, which meant there was an opportunity to catch up and quickly take him with her. She stealthily approached him, called out, and suddenly he notices her, as if he understands every word she says. It started out so well, but as soon as she took one step toward him, he ran away like he wasn't happy to see her. He ran away to a room that's been abandoned for a long time. They say it's even haunted. It's the late Duchess's room. There's a lot of dust here. She wants to go somewhere else, but she has to catch a kitten and unfortunately has no other choice. The girl was a little distracted and found some books about magic. She is losing time, and she herself does not notice it, and therefore, she is taking a risk and may soon regret it.